My husband had barely been buried when my in-laws asked my eldest brother-in-law to take over the family line for both branches of the family. I had no objections. So that very night I consummated the marriage with my eldest brother-in-law. 2 months later, my in-laws brought another child for me to adopt. But as I placed my hand on my belly, I exclaimed in astonishment, "Mother, I am already with child.If I adopt this child, he cannot be counted as my legitimate son with Jingtan. Though he may be considered a concubine's son. My mother-in-law was so shocked she nearly fainted. After all, in my previous life, to remain faithful to Wen Jingtang, I not only refused my eldest brother-in-law's offer to serve as the head of both households, but I also voluntarily adopted the child my in-laws had brought to me, raising him with all my heart and soul. Yet later, when he petitioned for a title on my behalf, the one he secured was for Wen Jingtang's young cousin. It was only then that I realized Wen Jingtang was supposed to have died young, had been living a blissful fairy tale life with his young cousin all along. He looked at me with the condescension of a benefactor. "I have already granted you the dignity and honor befitting the matriarch of a marquis's household for an entire lifetime. What more do you want? A lifetime of toil caring for his parents, raising our children, and bringing honor to our family had all become mere charity in his eyes." I refused to accept this, and dragged his entire family into the flames. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back on the day of Wen Jingtang's funeral. Main text. You and Jingtang have been married for 3 years without bearing a child. You have long since committed one of the 7 grounds for divorce. It is entirely justified for the Ning'an Marquis household to divorce you. The moment I opened my eyes, I heard my mother-in-law's stern and furious voice. I looked around in confusion and realized I was in the Wen family ancestral hall, holding Wen Jingtang's spirit tablet in my arms. Just then, Wen Jingtang's second sister-in-law approached to try to reason with me. "Mingxi, even if you won't think of Jingtang, you must think of yourself. You're still so young, and life is so long. How do you expect to live the rest of your days?" Seeing me staring blankly, she nudged me impatiently. I snapped back to reality, realizing I had somehow returned to the day when Jingyang was buried. On this very day in my previous life, the entire Wen family had pressured me to agree to let my eldest brother-in-law, Wen Jingyu, serve as the head of both branches of the family. When I refused, they took turns attacking me. I held out for over 2 months, just as I was on the verge of being driven mad. My in-laws brought a child to me. They said that since I refused to let my eldest brother-in-law inherit both branches of the family, they would adopt that child, place him under my and Wen Jingtang's names, raise him as a legitimate son, and have him inherit the Ning'an Marquisate in the future. I didn't suspect a thing. In fact, I was grateful that the child had arrived just in time. I devoted myself to caring for him and raising him. Before he was even 3, I secured a hereditary title for him, had him tutored by a renowned scholar, and spared no effort to pave his path to success so that by his early 20s, he had already become a favorite at the imperial court. Yet he accused me of having a heart of stone. For the sake of your own reputation, you tore me away from my family at a young age, forcing me to live under someone else's roof. I rose early and retired late every day, unable to get a single night's rest. If that isn't abuse, what is it? I will make you regret everything you've done to me. I fell gravely ill from the shock. Yet he imprisoned me in a dilapidated courtyard within the Marquis' estate and announced to the world that I had died suddenly. Meanwhile, Wen Jingtang had faked her death, returned to the Marquis' estate with her young cousin, becoming the Marquis of Ning'an and the Marquis' wife. My entire life had become a stepping stone for their family, but on what grounds? Suppressing my hatred, I began to sob quietly. My mother-in-law softened her voice and continued, "But considering the deep bond between you and Jingtang, and since the Ning'an Marquis' household is not one that shuns others, you cannot truly leave Jingtang without an heir. How could your father and I possibly face our ancestors with such shame?" Seeing that I remained silent, my youngest aunt from the Wen family joined in to persuade me. "Mingxi, look around. Which young man has been married for 3 years without a child, or whose bedchamber remains empty? It's just that Jingtang loves you and respects you, but you can't betray his deep affection. Can you, at the very least, give him an heir?" In my previous life, I too believed that when Jingtang refused to take a concubine because he respected and loved me, But later I came to realize that it was merely a promise he made to Jingyu, a vow of lifelong devotion to her alone.As for me. I was nothing more than a lifeline for the Wen family in its decline. My only duty was to drain every last drop of my blood and bone to restore the Wen family's glory. That was the extent of my mission, even if I met a miserable end. It would still be a favor bestowed upon me by Wen Jingtang, but how could such a good thing exist in this world for him to have both his cousin's undying devotion and the fame, fortune, and splendor of the Marquis's mansion? Seeing that I still said nothing, the crowd began to urge me on in a jumble of voices, filling the ancestral hall with a raucous din until the old Marquis put an end to it with a single word. "Don't you know where you are? What is all this commotion about?" Though the old Marquis had been corrupted by beauty over the years, he was, after all, the head of the Wen family. At his roar, the crowd fell instantly silent, and he turned to ask me, "Mu, tell us, what are your thoughts on having Jingyu serve as the heir for both branches of the family?" Tears streaming down my face, I looked up at them with utter despair. Finally, putting on an air of being forced into a corner, I slumped my shoulders. "I leave it entirely up to father and mother." Perhaps they hadn't expected me to give in. Everyone was taken aback. After all, they had all witnessed how deeply I loved Wen Jingtang. And they were certain I would never agree. That was why, on the day of his burial, they had presented me with such an impossible demand to pressure me. They hoped that when they brought back Wen Jingyu, I would readily agree to recognize him as the legitimate son. Even if I had discovered he was Wen Jingtang's illegitimate son, I wouldn't have made a big fuss. Unfortunately for them, I was about to disappoint them. At that moment, the certainty on my mother-in-law's face froze for an instant before suddenly turning to fury. "You, what did you say? You actually..." I flinched backward as if startled, just as a sharp voice rang out from outside the door. "Lady Ho, standing so close, and you still didn't hear clearly? Could it be that in your old age, your eyes have grown dim and your ears have gone deaf? Just like in my previous life." My sister-in-law had arrived, feeling somewhat wronged. I called out to her, "Sister-in-law." I had never liked this sister-in-law. She came from the countryside and was coarse in manner. My elder brother met her when he was sent down to the countryside, and she had followed him to every posting. It was only in the past 2 years, after my brother was transferred back to the capital, that she returned with him, back when mother was alive. She always considered my sister-in-law unsuitable for public appearances, and her family of origin offered no support to my brother. But in my previous life, whenever I suffered injustices in the Wen household, she was always the first to rush to my side to seek justice for me. When my brother was wrongfully demoted, she was the one who handled everything behind the scenes, pulling him back from the brink of death time and again, and holding up the Mu family's reputation to clear his name. A flicker of surprise crossed my sister-in-law's eyes, but she quickly stepped forward to support me. "Look at you, it's only been a few days, and you've grown so thin. Madam Zhuge, why have you come here?" My second sister-in-law seemed somewhat taken aback by my eldest sister-in-law's sudden appearance, although the Wen family looked down on my eldest sister-in-law, regarding her as a country bumpkin. They also feared her greatly, and this fear stemmed not only from my elder brother's position as imperial censor but also from my eldest sister-in-law's feisty nature, which set her apart from the typical ladies of the inner chambers. Naturally, "I've come to visit my younger sister. She and her husband were deeply in love. This separation by death has nearly taken half her life, but I never expected." My sister-in-law swept a cold, mocking glance across the room. The Ning'an Marquis household, which prides itself so much on propriety, could be so shameless. Their own son has barely been buried, and not even a day has passed before they're forcing their daughter-in-law to remarry. "I'm afraid you're the only ones in the capital who would do such a thing. Are you trying to take the other half of my sister's life as well? If so, don't blame my husband for reporting you to the authorities." Her voice was loud and piercing. The moment she finished speaking, everyone in the room shuddered. "Lady Zhuge, that's not what we meant." The Wen family had originally intended to pressure me behind closed doors. Certain that I wouldn't dare speak of it to outsiders for the sake of my reputation, they never imagined it would become public knowledge. After all, if word got out, They couldn't afford the loss of face. Who would dare marry a Wen family daughter in the future? Which family's daughter would dare marry into the Wen family? Not to mention if word reached the imperial court, then none of them would have an easy time of it. So they all rushed to pull my sister-in-law aside and try to smooth things over to end my previous life. On the day when Jingtang was buried, the Wen family forced me to accept Wen Jingyu as the joint heir to both branches of the family. When my sister-in-law arrived, she did stand up for me and berated the entire Wen family to high heaven, but later, she still carefully explained to me the benefits of allowing Wen Jingyu to inherit both branches of the family. She said that in this generation of the Wen family, there are only two brothers, Wen Jingyu and Wen Jingtang. Now that Wen Jingtang has passed away without an heir, the position of crown prince can only fall to Wen Jingyu, even if he is merely an illegitimate son whom no one cares about, unless the old Marquis of Wen chooses to relinquish his title.If you agree to let Wen Jingyu inherit from both branches. Since he is currently unmarried, you will have the final say over both households in the future. You can merge the two branches into one, and you will remain the heiress of the Ning'an Marquisate future marquise, and you won't have to worry that Wen Jingyu will gain power through his title, leaving you helpless and struggling to make ends meet. But back then, relying on the substantial dowry my mother had provided for me, I thought that even if I were to become a widow, I would have nothing to fear. So I spoke without mercy. Sister-in-law, do you think everyone in this world is as selfish and mercenary as you? The love between Jingtang and me is as clear as day. He has only just passed away, and now you're telling me to marry another man. Do you think I'm as heartless as you? My sister-in-law flushed red at my words. Yet she still patiently tried to reason with me. In this world, it's hard for a woman. One can't help but look out for oneself. The Wen family is a web of complex relationships. Who knows how many people are watching you, hoping you'll fill the void. Why must you? But I didn't let her finish. I dismissed her with a single accusation of ingratitude and callousness. Looking back now, she must have seen through the Wen family's filth long ago, yet I was so foolish that I had to wallow in that quagmire myself before I finally came to my senses. What's this? Are you now denying that you forced my younger sister to agree to inherit the lineages of both households? My mother-in-law turned pale with anger, sitting there seething but unable to speak. Seeing her silence, my second aunt hurried to smooth things over. It's not like that. Lady Zhuge, please hear me out. It's just that Jingtang passed away so young without leaving an heir for the Marquis' household, but the title can't simply be allowed to die out. So that's why. Second aunt also felt that the eldest branch could under no circumstances allow the title to pass to an outsider. By standing up for Lady Sun and the old Marquis now, she could save face and secure some benefits in the future. Which is why she stepped forward despite the pressure from her elder sister-in-law. Her elder sister-in-law shot a glance at her mother-in-law and sneered. But my younger sister has already been forced into agreeing by you all. What more do you want? Misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Mingxi's agreement is precisely what everyone wants. Right. 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 Everyone's happy. Everyone's happy. The repeated cries of everyone's happy made Sunshine and the others turn pale and twitch at the corners of their eyes, but since it was all her idea to begin with, and everyone had followed her lead, she couldn't very well step forward now and admit she'd been talking nonsense all along. She had no choice but to grit her teeth and swallow her pride, hoping only that I would be sensible enough to observe mourning for her son and not actually let Wen Jingyu inherit the family line from both branches. Otherwise, her plans would come to naught. After seeing my sister-in-law off, I had my maid Feng Chen send a gift to Wen Jingyu. As night fell and I was just about to extinguish the lamp, Feng Chuan's voice came from outside the door. Madam, the eldest young master has arrived. I threw on a robe and rose to my feet. Before long, when Jingyu walked in, he stood in the dim light. I couldn't make out his features, but I could sense his subtle, reserved gaze. I end my previous life. After I refused his request to inherit the line of both families, he didn't hold a grudge and went about his daily duties as usual. But that same year, in the imperial examinations, he passed the Jinshi level, was granted a post in the provincial administration, and was sent to the remote region of Yizhou. He ultimately perished during a bandit siege in Liangzhou. His attendants returned his personal effects, among which was a pair of South Sea pearl earrings, one of which he had reserved solely for me. In a panic, I rummaged through the bottom of a chest and found the identical matching pair. only then realizing that all those years, I had mistaken my savior's identity. That winter, when I was 13, I snuck out to play and was unexpectedly attacked by bandits, who injured both my eyes. Just as I was on the brink of death, someone carried me on their back and ran all night long. When he delivered me back to the Mu residence and was about to leave, I grabbed him and demanded to know his name and background, insisting I would come to his door to thank him, worn down by my persistence. He finally relented and said only that he came from the house of the Marquis of Ningand. I assumed my savior was Wen Jingtang after all. At that time Wen Jingyu had not yet been recognized as a member of the Wen family. And there was only one heir apparent in the Wen household. It was only later that I learned. On the day I went to thank him, the reason Wen Jingtang claimed the credit for saving my life was simply because of his vanity. Yet because of that vanity, I chased after him shamelessly for 5 or 6 years, until my father passed away and my mother fell gravely ill. Wishing to see me married before she died, Wen Jingyu didn't wait for me to feel torn. He took the initiative to propose and present betrothal gifts. Allowing my mother to pass away peacefully, he also stayed by my side as I gradually recovered from the grief of losing both parents, helping me regain hope in life. I thought I'd found my place in life. But little did I know everything had already gone awry. But it doesn't matter now that I've been given a second chance. I'll set everything right. Back then, you were the one who saved me, weren't you? Seeing me draw closer, Wen Jingyu couldn't help but take a small step back. But he hadn't realized that Bao Chen had already closed the door behind him, leaving him with nowhere to retreat. I wouldn't let it go, taking another half step forward until my body was almost pressed against his, yet still maintaining a sliver of space between us. Didn't you say you'd inherit the lineages of both families? What are you afraid of? I looked up at his expressionless face, sensing his restraint and suppressed emotions, yet in stark contrast, his heartbeat pounded like a drum. Surging with intensity, I grew a little anxious and took a slight step back. But he swept his arm around me, pulling me tightly into his embrace. I felt his hot breath against my ear. Who's afraid? Want to try? Beneath Wen Jingyu's dignified and proper exterior lay a hint of terrifying, roguelike ferocity. At first, I had foolishly teased him, but in the end, it all led to the bitter consequence of me begging for mercy. He kept me up all night, and the next day, I didn't wake until the afternoon. As soon as I opened my eyes, Bao Chen came over. Miss, the matter has been settled, but yesterday, I had Bao Chen spread the word about the Wen family forcing me to inherit the family line for both branches. But I hadn't expected the news to have already spread throughout the outside world. People were buzzing with gossip, all saying that the Ningyan Marquis household had no decency. Their son had just died. Yet they demanded their daughter-in-law remarry their illegitimate son with her dowry. It was utterly shameless and defied all reason. The rumors were vivid and detailed, vividly depicting how Lady Sun and the old Marquis had pressured me, how I had been left with no choice, and how I had finally gritted my teeth and agreed. For a time, the crowd, those coming to gawk and those united in outrage, was in an uproar. However, none of this happened in my previous life. I suspect this is most likely the handiwork of my sister-in-law. It was both to cut off the Marquis's retreat and to place me on the moral high ground, thereby preventing any future attempts to tarnish my reputation. I'd already been forced to agree to serve as the joint heiress for both branches in the ancestral hall. What else could I do? The whole of the capital knew how I'd treated Wen Jingtang in the past. So now, agreeing to serve as my eldest brother-in-law's joint heiress so he might have an heir, it seemed like something I was capable of doing. I instructed Bao Chen. Starting today, I will shut my doors to visitors, tell everyone I am unwell. As for the rest, I paused. Have someone keep a close watch on Aunt Zhu, who is always by the Marquis's wife's side. The moment there is any news of the Crown Prince, report it to me immediately. Bao Chen was stunned. I briefly explained to her that when Jingtang was not dead, she was both furious and indignant. And in the end, she nearly burst into tears. How could the Crown Prince treat you like this, Miss? I comforted her for a moment, then instructed, don't let anyone find out. Yes, after Bao Chen left, I summoned Aunt Chen and Feng Chen. They had always been in charge of managing my dowry since when Jingtang was dead. I wouldn't need to use my dowry to subsidize the Marquis's household anymore, would I? Though the Ningyan Marquis's household was a marquisate, after 3 generations, It was now little more than a facade. My maternal grandfather was the wealthiest man in Jinling, and my mother was the only daughter of her family when she married my father. She took nearly all of the family's assets with her. Later, under her management, those assets multiplied several times over when I married Wen Jingtang. My mother and brother, fearing I might suffer injustices at the Marquis's residence, left 2/3 of the family's assets to me. People say that marrying a woman from the Mu family is like marrying a mountain of gold and silver. Yet, back then, I regarded Wen Jingtang as my savior. He was all I saw and thought of when he asked for my hand. I happily agreed, believing I had found my true love. But in my previous life, the people of the Marquis's mansion kept the news of Wen Jingtang's fake death from me while, with a clear conscience, they enjoyed the support I provided, spending my money and living their comfortable lives. But where in this world are there such good things? In this life, I will make them spit back everything they've swallowed. Auntie Chen was my mother's personal maid and later became my wet nurse. She has 2 sons, who are currently helping me manage the shops and estates. I told Aunt Chen, from now on, don't worry about the Marquis's mansion's business. We'll gradually withdraw our support and stop giving them preferential terms. If they get angry, have someone spread the word far and wide that the Ningyan Marquis's mansion letting my half-brother inherit both branches of the family line is nothing but a scheme to get their hands on my dowry. Let's see if the Anning Marquis's household has the nerve to admit it. For now, I must settle the matter of my dowry with the Marquis's household as soon as possible, lest it become increasingly difficult to untangle as time goes on, just like in my previous life, when I used my dowry to cover the Marquis's household's financial shortfalls, and the estates and shops were shared by both sides only to have my dowry, through endless wrangling, eventually turned into the Marquis's household's property. As for Wen Jingyu, he's never been favored by the Marquis's household otherwise. He wouldn't have only been recognized as a son just before his 20th birthday, once he passes the imperial examinations and is assigned to a post. I need only conceive a child before he leaves, then, whether it's my dowry or the entire Marquis's estate, it will all belong solely to my child. And no one else will get a single penny. But if the crown prince returns and holds us accountable, won't the young lady and the crown prince? Feng Chen, still reeling from the news that Wen Jingtang had faked his death, spoke in a trembling voice upon hearing that I would no longer provide financial support to the Wen family. But before she could finish, Matron Chen, standing nearby, cut her off. What nonsense! He's only just escaped by faking his death, and the Marquis's household is already pressuring the young lady to inherit the family line from both branches, even if he returns. What kind of life could the young lady possibly have? Aunt Chen truly saw things clearly. Had Feng Chen not remained so loyal to me in my previous life, I'm afraid I would have harbored resentment toward her by now. Afterward, I asked Aunt Chen to help me find several Yangzhou courtesans of exceptional beauty and figure. Doesn't Wen Jingtang pride himself on being a ladiesman, with a particular fondness for delicate, willow-like young ladies? Well, I'll let him have his fill, judging by the timing. Xin Yuexin should be giving birth soon. Let this serve as my gift for their child's 1-month celebration. After Feng Chen left, Aunt Chen spoke earnestly. Young lady, given Feng Chuan's nature and the current situation, I'm afraid. I understood what the matron meant. Feng Chen was rigid and inflexible in her work. Lacking quick wit, I feared she might slip up if faced with unexpected situations, which could end up causing trouble. Matron, please help me select some young maids for Feng Chen to train properly. As for her, though she is timid by nature, she excels in meticulousness. Have Brother De Chao mentor her, and in the future, let her assist me with some accounting matters. De Chao is Matron Chen's eldest son. Matron Chen was taken aback. She likely hadn't expected that I wasn't sending Feng Chen away, but rather grooming her to become a shop manager. Feng Chen has practically grown up under your watch, madam, though she's a bit younger than Brother De Chao. She's quite capable and has a lovely appearance. What do you think? Upon hearing this, Aunt Chen immediately realized I was trying to match Feng Chen with Chaoshi. Her face lit up with delight, and she thanked me profusely. In my previous life, Chaoshi married a lazy, gluttonous wife who ran the household into the ground. Later, He even resigned from his position as head manager because that wife tried to seize my dowry. It was precisely because Chaosher left that my dowry was later haphazardly seized by the Wen family. As for Fengchen, she never married for my sake. Growing old as a spinster later on, she was the one who kept track of the accounts for me, which is why I didn't suffer too many silent losses. After mentioning Fengchen, my thoughts turned to Brother Chao. He was primarily in charge of my estates, and if I recall correctly, not long after, a village in Daxing was driven to despair when the lady of Chongning County forced several families to their deaths by lending money at exorbitant interest rates, but the matter was kept under wraps until my brother was impeached and imprisoned for a poem he wrote to celebrate the chancellor's birth. His opponents accused him of disrespecting the Empress Dowager and undermining royal authority. Later, due to power struggles among the various political factions, he nearly met his end by beheading my sister-in-law. Upon hearing of this, took the opposition by surprise and managed to turn my brother's death sentence into a demotion and exile. At that time, I was distraught over Wen Jingtang's passing and the pressure from my in-laws. After my brother's imprisonment, I fell gravely ill. Had it not been for my sister-in-law's tireless support, the Mu family might truly have fallen apart, but no one could have foreseen that. Though she saved my brother, she lost track of our 3-year-old niece because she was stretched too thin, a burden of guilt that haunted her for the rest of her life, nearly weeping her eyes out. Now that I've been given a second chance at life, my top priority must be to protect my family, have Brother Chao keep an eye on the farmers in Daxing and investigate whether any deaths have resulted from usury, report back immediately if anything comes up. Although Aunt Shin didn't understand why I was investigating this, she agreed to handle it immediately. In a few days, it would be the Chancellor's birthday. I didn't know if I could change my brother's fate this time, but it never hurt to be prepared. I wrote a letter to my sister-in-law, saying I wasn't feeling well and asking if Sister Hua could come to keep me company. That very evening, Sister Hua was sent over. My brother and I are 12 years apart. He had already left for a regional academy when I was born. Later, after passing the imperial examinations, he took a post in the provinces. So emotionally, we weren't particularly close, not to mention my sister-in-law, whom my mother was always going on about, and the children she'd born. I really wasn't very familiar with them. Hua Jier was the only one born in the year I married Wen Jingtang. By then, my brother had already returned to the capital, and though we saw each other a bit more often, strictly speaking, we weren't all that close. But Hua Jier was as lovely as a snow-white jade figurine, with a chubby little face and 2 dimples. When she smiled, it was sweeter than honey, making her utterly endearing. When Jingyang and I never had children of our own, I'd once thought of inviting Hua Jier and her family over to visit, but when Jingyang always said the children's noise would disturb me, and that his parents didn't like commotion. So I gave up on the idea, and over time, I even grew distant from my brother and sister-in-law. Looking back now, I suspect he did it on purpose to drive a wedge between me and my birth family, so that later, when I was mistreated by his family, I'd be left with no one to turn to. It's truly despicable. That afternoon, after I got to know Hua Jier, she insisted I tell her a story that night before she'd go to sleep, but just as we got into bed, Wen Jingyu showed up. When he learned I was putting Hua Jier to sleep, he sat quietly in my room and waited. After Hua Jier fell asleep, I went over and found him reading the storybook I'd been using to pass the time. On the table lay an unfamiliar box and a set of miniature bamboo chairs and a table. There were even several delicate teapots and cups on the table, presumably a gift for Hua Jier. I walked over, and he stood up somewhat awkwardly, wanting to approach me but seeming to hold himself back. Just thinking about how reckless he'd been in bed made my blood boiled. I pushed the box on the table toward him and asked with a snort, "What are these?" "Gifts for you and Hua Jier. I thought you might like them." He carefully pushed the box toward me. I opened it without hesitation and discovered it contained a complete set of molted gemstone, golden-laid pomegranate patterned head ornaments. Most of the pomegranate seeds were carved from single pieces of gemstone and set into the design. Each one was lifelike and dazzling. Suddenly, I recalled a memory from my previous life. When he was stationed in Izhou, he would send holiday gifts to the Ho family estate every festival season, each person arriving with a cartload of presents. Among the pile of items sent to me was this set of head ornaments, worth a fortune back then. However, it lay dusty and buried beneath a heap of local specialties from Izhou. It took immense effort to dig it out, Had the servant who delivered it not specifically mentioned it was for me, I would have thought it had been sent to the wrong person, but at that time, Wen Jingtang had just passed away, and I was observing my widowhood. Though I loved these ornaments dearly, I never wore them even once. Later, when Wen Yanli was to study at the Imperial Academy and needed to grease the wheels, I gave away this pomegranate-shaped headpiece to secure a recommendation through Princess Qing'an. I never imagined, however, that he would track this very item down at this very moment. As my fingers traced the exquisitely crafted pomegranate seeds, I recalled how, in my previous life, when I petitioned for Wen Yanli to be named Crown Prince, the memorial was held up for a long time later. Wen Jingyu somehow found out and wrote me a letter, telling me to seek out his senior classmate, Zhou Qing, who was then serving as a lecturer in the Hanlin Academy. This man had a particularly sharp tongue and usually despised us, the scions of aristocratic families who relied on hereditary privileges. I had no other choice but to turn to him. I had expected to be scolded, but to my surprise, it was the officials in the Ministry of Rights reviewing the matter who ended up being reprimanded, less than half a month later. When Yanli's designation as Crown Prince was officially confirmed, many other matters followed, whether involving the Marquis's household or my brother's affairs, and whenever I faced a dilemma, his hands seemed to be behind the resolution. I hadn't known he was helping my brother. But after Wen Jingyu's death, my brother returned to the capital to report on his duties and let it slip. He said that after his demotion, he'd expected to spend the rest of his life as a county magistrate in some remote region, but thanks to Wen Jingyu's assistance, he was transferred every 3 years and eventually ended up as a prefect in the prosperous region of Jiangnan. He was deeply grateful to Wen Jingyu and believed him to be exceptionally capable. Had he been able to remain in the capital for his post back then, his achievements would surely have been far greater than those he attained in Ezhou. I really like it, could you help me put it on? I pushed the box toward him and walked over to the dressing table to select a hair ornament. He couldn't hide his astonishment and quickly followed me. Step for step, when did you get this? I casually watched Wen Jingyu in the mirror as he unwrapped the hair ornament for me. His hand paused, and he lowered his gaze. I saw it today and thought it would suit you, so I bought it. I shot him a sidelong glance but didn't call him out on his lie. The quality of the gemstones in this headpiece was exceptional, and the craftsmanship was nothing short of masterful. An item that combines such perfect timing and location could never be sold casually by an ordinary jewelry shop, and even if it were sold, the price would certainly not be cheap. Where would he, an unloved illegitimate son of a marquis's household, get the money? However, judging by Wen Jingyu's achievements in governing Ezhou in my previous life, rising to become the governor of a province within a decade, moreover, he transformed a region plagued by frequent banditry and widespread rebellions into a place of peace and prosperity, where the people lived in contentment. Wen Jingyu's abilities were certainly not to be underestimated, but since he didn't mention it, I didn't press the matter. After all, who doesn't have a few secrets? I must admit that red truly suits me. The entire set of dazzling jewels made me look radiant and dazzling, as if I were bathed in a glow of precious stones. After helping me put on the jewelry, Wen Jingyu wanted to draw my eyebrows for me. I wasn't keen on it at first, but his anticipation was so obvious that my heart softened, and I let him have his way. Yet his breath on my face grew hotter and hotter, and as I tilted my head back to look at him, I found his features increasingly handsome, even more so than when Jingtan sand. I began to feel a stir of desire. You must know that Wen Jingyang is a renowned heartthrob in the capital. Otherwise, I wouldn't have chased after him all those years. I do tend to judge by appearances. After gazing at him for a few more moments, I couldn't resist any longer. I wrapped my arms around Wen Jingyu's neck, pulled him down toward me, and kissed his lips. It was only a moment before he took control, pressing his advantage. I saw it with my own eyes. It was the crown prince. My cousin was with him, and her belly looked to be 8 or 9 months along. I made inquiries and heard she's due to give birth in about a month. The two of them call each other husband and wife. A few days later, when Bao Chun returned to the manor, I learned that Wen Jingtang had actually bought a sizable garden estate nestled against the mountains and beside the water in the neighboring county and made it his home. This time, Bao Chun had followed Zhu Mianluo, was accompanying Wen Jingtang and his party to deliver a midwife, and that's how she tracked down their whereabouts. Given their lavish lifestyle, complete with a retinue of servants, their expenses must be considerable. But since neither Wen Jingtang nor Wen were people who worked for a living only indulging in pleasure, their expenses were naturally covered by the Marquis's household. Thinking about it now, that money was most likely the allowance Sunshine had sent to her family, paid from the public funds. 1,000 taels a month that I end my previous life. I used my own dowry to plug the holes in the Marquis's estate, working tirelessly to earn money to support the household, never imagining I was also feeding those two gluttons, Wen Jingtang and Wen. Well, in this life, I'll see just how they managed to live their life of luxury without money. Within a couple of days, the steward and Auntie Zhu came to ask why this month's silver hadn't arrived yet. I was lounging on a large pillow, responding casually, "You'll have to ask my sister-in-law about that." Auntie Zhu, why should I ask the lady? Auntie Zhu looked thoroughly exasperated, that old hag, relying on her status as Lady Sun's personal attendant, had no shortage of ways to trip me up in the past. I end my previous life. When Wen Jingtang and the others returned, she was the one who made the most fuss about divorcing me. She's never shied away from bullying and taking advantage of Mesh's quite the piece of work. I shot her a glance and lazily rubbed my forehead. Jingtang's passing was so sudden, and I'm in such poor health. The other day, the estate manager and the shopkeeper came to discuss matters, but I was too weak to handle it, so I told them to go see my sister-in-law. My brother and sister-in-law were worried about me, so they took over all the properties in my name. Aunt Zhu, tell me if not her, then who else should I have asked? How could you hand over your dowry to your brother and sister-in-law? Aunt Zhu was both furious and indignant. As if I'd given away her own possessions. I snorted derisively and sat up slightly straighter. What? Is it up to you, Aunt Zhu, to decide who gets my dowry and who doesn't? No sooner had I spoken than Aunt Chen slapped Aunt Zhu across the face. Who do you think you are, daring to interfere with our young mistress's decisions? Madame Zhu was knocked to the ground, completely dazed. The steward, Wen Tao, was startled as well, just as he was about to say something. He saw several maids and matrons neatly dressed and clearly part of a military unit surge into the courtyard. Terrified, he shrunk back to one side. Unable to move, Madame Zhu quickly scrambled to her feet. You actually dared to lay a hand on me. Do you know? But before she could finish, a burly matron slapped her across the face with a hand as wide as a palm fan. How dare you speak to the mistress like that? Madame Zhu was knocked to the ground, spitting out a few teeth with a gurgle. When Tao shuddered in fright, I glanced at him and sighed. My brother and sister-in-law were worried about me. They feared I might suffer injustices in the Marquis's mansion after losing my husband, so they arranged for a few capable maids and matrons to protect me in case any insolent servants dared to bully me. At first, I didn't want them. I thought the servants here were decent enough, but who would have thought to just ask head steward Wen. This matron Zhu, a mere servant, actually dared to meddle with this lady's dowry. Doesn't she deserve a beating? Wen Tao was quite an interesting man. I in my previous life. Though I knew Wen Jingtang had faked his death and that the Marquis's household was taking advantage of me, I also understood clearly that the household relied on me to live such a good life. And he actually helped me quite a bit later, when I was imprisoned. He even helped me find a doctor and send medicine. In the end, he was caught by Wen Yanli while trying to send a message to my brother and sister-in-law, and was beaten to death with clubs. If you call him righteous and clever, he first kept Wen Jingtang's feigned death a secret from me, then risked his life to save me, sacrificing his own future in the process. If you call him utterly foolish, he was also shrewd enough to know who could ensure his livelihood, serving me diligently and dutifully. When Tao was frail of build and knew he was no match for a burly, sturdy servant woman. He immediately knelt before me. Madam is absolutely right. A servant like me truly deserves a beating. I snorted, said no more, and ordered them to be thrown out. Before long, Lady Sun arrived at my courtyard. Fuming with rage, little did she expect that the moment she stepped inside, she would see my sister-in-law and Mrs. Huang, the censor's wife, poring over a list. She immediately turned to leave, but my sister-in-law stepped forward with a smile and pulled her back in, her clear voice ringing out. We were just saying we should go visit our in-laws, and here you are. Madame Huang also smiled as she exchanged pleasantries with Madame Sun. One can tell at a glance that the lady of the Marquis of Anning truly dotes on her daughter-in-law, knowing she was unwell. You came personally to visit, that is truly rare. Madam's son forced a stiff smile. Not at all. Not at all. I followed behind her and saw the veins bulging in her neck from the pent-up frustration. I nearly burst out laughing. Madame Huang and my sister-in-law were close friends despite their age difference to I in my previous life. After my brother was imprisoned, she and the Grand Censor went out of their way to help secure his release. They were even demoted and exiled to a distant province because of their efforts on his behalf. The two families were as close as branches of the same tree. A bond of mutual trust, that is why. Upon hearing that I intended to sever ties with the Ning'an Marquis household regarding my dowry, my sister-in-law chose her as the mediator. Once Lady Sun had taken her seat and heard my sister-in-law explain that I was too frail to manage the dowry myself and wished to entrust it to her care, she immediately grew agitated. What? You want to let your brother and sister-in-law manage your dowry? I feigned a startled flinch, and my sister-in-law immediately pulled me into her arms. Lady Ning'an, look at what you're saying. Anyone who didn't know better would think my sister had already handed over your dowry for us to manage. My sister-in-law had always been direct in her speech to I in the past. Out of consideration for me. She had been quite polite to the Sun family, but after they pressured me into inheriting the ancestral line of both households, she suddenly felt that unnecessary politeness only invited contempt. So she became much more forthright upon hearing this. Lady Huang choked in surprise and hurried to cover for her. Eyeing. What are you saying? The Marquis' household is a distinguished family. They wouldn't covet Mingxi's dowry. The Marquis' wife was merely startled by your sudden remark. How could that mean she's given her the dowry? Besides, the Marquis' wife is clearly a reasonable woman. How could she possibly meddle in her daughter-in-law's dowry affairs? Don't go spreading those wild rumors out there. It will only damage the harmony between our two families. The servants may be clueless, but surely the Marquis isn't. Isn't that right, madam? In the first half of her sentence, she scolded my sister-in-law. In the second, she directly put Sunshire in her place to I in front of everyone. Sunshire was so flustered she turned red in the face and bulged her neck. I in the end, she could only smile and agree. Then was dragged off by Madame Huang to go over my dowry list. This went on for most of the day. She couldn't even leave if she wanted to. In the end, she even signed and stamped my dowry list, indicating that she served as a witness specifying exactly how my dowry was to be handed over to my brother and sister-in-law now, and how it must be returned in the future. Though she was seething with rage, she had no choice but to host a banquet for my sister-in-law and her party, and finally saw them off with polite courtesy. The moment the door closed, she glared at me with pure hatred. I said nothing, only sobbed quietly. She had no choice but to smash a few teacups and order me to go back to my room to reflect on my actions. I couldn't care less about her. A few days later, when Jingtang was pressing hard for payment, since I hadn't contributed any money to the household funds, Madame Sun had no choice but to open her private treasury and give Wen Jingtang 800 taels of silver to send over. Little did I know that Thick Night Tin Shining Garmer scenario I'd prepared for Wen Jingtang was about to unfold. One day, when Jingtang went out to meet a friend, just as they were chatting happily, they encountered a thug who was bullying a man and a woman, forcing two sisters to become concubines to settle their father's gambling debts. At his friend's urging, when Jingtang spent a fortune, even borrowing an additional 200 taels from his friend to sign a contract with the thug, buying the sisters' freedom and bringing the two tearful beauties back to the garden, holding the 1,000 taels of silver delivered by Bao Chun. I was overjoyed and distributed rewards to everyone in the courtyard. I in high spirits. I even went into the storeroom and picked out 2 exquisite jade pendants and a brooch for Wen Jingyu, as a return gift for the presents he'd been sending me off and on these past few days. Today, his academy was closed for the day, so he took Wajier to an elephant park in the capital that had recently opened and was already a huge hit. He had originally wanted me to come along and had pestered me about it until midnight. Only then did I learn that the elephant park was actually something he and a few friends had set up to get her. Besides the elephant, it featured all sorts of rare acrobatic acts and games gathered from all over the country. The people of the capital had never seen anything like it before, so they flocked there in droves, combined with the high ticket prices. It's no exaggeration to say the place was raking in a fortune every day. No wonder he had the money to buy me things, but I didn't want to run into anyone I knew, so no matter how much he pleaded, I wouldn't budge. As a result, he was quite resentful when I left this morning, Just thinking about his dejected expression makes me chuckle. When I lived with Wen Jingyu before, I was mostly the one revolving around him, taking care of his every need, making him the center of my world. I used to think that was just how life was supposed to be. I never imagined that now, with Wen Jingyu, things would be completely different. He'd bring me little gifts from time to me, a piece of jewelry, a box of pastries, or even just a grass-woven grasshopper made by a farmer. I could tell he was trying to win my favor. When I was happy, he was happy. When I wasn't, he'd get nervous. Yet that feeling of being cherished, I had never experienced it with Wen Jingyu, but perhaps because I've lived a lifetime before. No matter how captivating this feeling is, it won't make me lose myself, having been reborn. I just want to live a little more comfortably. As for Wen Jingyu, since he saved my life and I have no way to repay him, I'll simply grant him the title of Crown Prince. But I never expected Xin Yuexin's retribution to come so quickly. In just a few days, she discovered Wen Jingtang sleeping in another woman's bed, and that woman was even better at putting on a show than she was. With just one glance, the woman's eyes welled up with tears, and she pleaded pitifully for Xin Yuexin to punish her instead of blaming Wen Jingtang. She was so enraged she wanted to kill the woman, but Wen Jingtang stopped her, accidentally pushing her in the process. As a result, Xin Yuexin went into premature labor and, after 2 days of labor, gave birth to a weak, barely breathing baby boy. The ordeal had severely weakened her, leaving her bedridden. Yet within half a month, she discovered Wen Jingtang had entered yet another woman's chamber. She wept bitterly day after day. Yet she never considered that if Wen Jingtang could so easily cast aside his wife and family, abandon his responsibilities, and elope with her, he could just as easily cast aside his promises and feelings for her and throw himself into another woman's arms. He had always been cheap. Upon learning that Xin Yuexin had given birth to a grandson, Madame's son, overjoyed, sent them a cartload of gifts, but I couldn't help but notice that all these items had been purchased from outside. I took some measures to ensure my sister-in-law discovered she had bought items like longevity locks and tiger head hats for the infant. My sister-in-law had someone follow the cart and, by chance, uncovered Wen Jingtang's secret of faking his death. At the same time, a scandal erupted in Daxing involving several peasant families who, unable to repay the high-interest loans they'd taken out to buy seeds, were forced to sell their children and, in some cases, even throw their entire families into the river. Several other families were also exposed for having been driven to extinction by these usurious loans. The situation escalated rapidly. Within just 2 or 3 days, first the scholars of the capital, then countless peasants, were clamoring for justice for the common people. The situation immediately began to spiral out of control. Soon, someone struck the drum of public petition to accuse Princess Changning of treating human life with contempt. The emperor ordered the Ministry of Justice to conduct a thorough investigation into the case, with the censorate overseeing the inquiry, to ensure justice was served to the people. Daxing, being a suburb of the capital, meant that this matter reaching the emperor's ears was tantamount to a murder occurring right under the sun of heaven's nose. A devastating blow to the entire court. Just the day before, the chancellor had been embroiled in an ugly dispute over several aristocratic families who had been arrested for usury. Now, with Princess Changning's scandalous case, one that shook the very foundations of the court, breaking out, he was suddenly overjoyed. As if he had received the greatest birthday gift imaginable. He cancelled his birthday celebrations, put his temper aside, and appeared in the court every day with a radiant glow, confronting the aristocratic clans and pushing forward his new policies. These new policies were designed to strike directly at the clan's Achilles' heel, whether it was curbing their private usury operations, encouraging households exempt from labor duties to pay labor assistance taxes, or annually surveying their lands to levy taxes based on soil fertility. Every measure hit the clans where it hurt. The court was in an uproar every single day. As for my brother, he had absolutely no time or inclination to attend the chancellor's birthday celebration or engage in the usual formalities. Not only had the task of overseeing the Supreme Court's thorough investigation into the Princess of Changning's case fallen on his shoulders, but he had also discovered that his own brother-in-law had faked his death to keep a mistress and father a son. Given my brother's upright nature, he might have caused a scene right then and there, but my sister-in-law stopped him. As soon as my sister-in-law discovered that Wen Jingyan had faked his death, she came to find me and asked indirectly, "How are things between you and Wen Jingyu?" She asked with difficulty and great caution, pretending not to notice her discomfort. I blushed and said, "He's definitely different from Jingyang. Every day when he comes home, he brings me little trinkets, tries to cheer me up, and considers my feelings, even that 'tis more pleasurable, sister-in-law." I truly didn't know life could be lived this way. My sister-in-law listened to me with a complex expression. Finally, she sighed softly, patted my head, and said, "All this time, you've really had it rough." Ming 11. My heart skipped a beat in that moment. The pent-up grievances of 2 lifetimes could no longer be contained, and I buried my face in my sister-in-law's embrace, weeping my heart out. That evening, when Jingyu returned, seeing my red-rimmed eyes and listless expression, he didn't ask why but simply held me close and comforted me for a long while. I took the opportunity to blackmail him out of 2 sets of jewelry to give to my sister Huat. He wasn't stingy and agreed without hesitation. The next day, my brother invited Wen Jingyu to the Baoyue pavilion, and my sister-in-law settled me in a private room. I've read your essay. The structure and theme are both good. Do you plan to enter the civil service through the imperial examinations in the future? My brother was very direct, seeing that I was a bit confused. My sister-in-law hurried to explain. Your brother inquired at his academy, though he's been wandering outside for many years. His character is upright and his mind open. His friends and teachers speak highly of him. Your brother's point is that you should listen to his plans today so you can handle things better in the future. Handle what? You're so clueless. Do you really want him to serve 2 families at once? Seeing my confusion, my sister-in-law tapped my forehead in exasperation. Then what else? It's just for show. Just say it's like that. Since you're fond of him, as long as you haven't changed your mind. He can only be your man and he can only be good to you alone. You grew up with mom and dad. Didn't you see how close they were? I couldn't help but widen my eyes. Are my brother and sister-in-law really this bossy? As for my parents, they share a rare, deep connection. It's completely different. Okay. Just then, I heard my brother's gentle, persuasive voice. Have you ever considered following the path of a noble family like becoming the heir apparent of the Ning'an Marquis estate? For instance, I was stunned, since when had my brother and I been so in tune with each other? I looked at my sister-in-law in disbelief, but she simply ruffled my hair. Your brother has a plan. Don't worry about it. It suddenly dawned on me. I'd guided my sister-in-law to uncover Wen Jingtang's feigned death, intending to keep my brother from attending the Chancellor's birthday celebration. I never imagined my brother and sister-in-law would use this to directly propel Wen Jingyu into power. I don't know what methods he'll use, but the outcome will certainly be faster than my gradual approach. Just as I was thinking this, my brother's astonished voice rang out again. You also believe the new policies benefit the country and the people. Then why do your teachers and friends rarely hear you speak at length about them? And when they do, it's only a sentence or 2 of hasty assertions. I don't know how the 2 of them steered the conversation toward the new policies, but my brother was quite interested. But I heard Wen Jingyu reply calmly. The nation is vast. When there is a lack of unity in thought between the upper and lower classes, it is extremely difficult to achieve top-down implementation. If it were me, I would start by piloting the reforms at the local level. It suddenly occurred to me that in my previous life, after Wen Jingyu passed the imperial examinations, he took the path of being assigned to a local post, along with 7 or 8 of his classmates. Over the course of a decade or so, they implemented the new policies in the provinces, expanding from a single county to prefectures and commanderies, eventually connecting them into a unified network. They truly succeeded in putting those policies which benefited both the country and its people into practice. It dawned on me. So, whether in my past life or now, had Wen Jingyu already mapped out his future starting from this very moment? Upon hearing Wen Jingyu's words, my sister-in-law's brows knitted tighter and tighter. Judging by the way he's talking, does he intend to take up a post in the provinces? What about you? I pressed my lips together and smiled faintly. Sister-in-law, you're being silly. Can't I just live wherever I please? My sister-in-law looked puzzled for a moment. Then her eyes lit up and she clapped her hands. Why didn't I think of that? First, let him secure the position of crown prince. Then you'll be the crown prince's wife in good and proper standing. Once he passes the imperial examinations, He'll be the top scholar among the aristocratic families. By then, if the emperor takes a liking to him, he'll surely send him to a prosperous region. You can accompany him there. And you won't have to put up with those two old fools at the Marquis's mansion. Excellent. Excellent. That's exactly what we'll do. My sister-in-law grew more and more pleased as she spoke. But her expression suddenly turned serious. Your brother will have to work hard at this. Though, otherwise, he won't be able to keep him in check. And what if you end up suffering because of it? She spoke with such earnestness. Yet my heart warmed at her words, but I never in a million years expected that Wen Jingyu would actually agree to my brother's domineering demand. No wives. No concubiness, just me for the rest of his life, and my brother wasted no time. That very day, he hired a gang of grave robbers to dig up Wen Jingtang's grave to prove he wasn't dead. The next day, he hosted a banquet for his colleagues at his newly acquired courtyard, where they recited poetry and exchanged couplets. Coincidentally, his newly purchased courtyard was right across the street from Wen Jingyan's residence in the neighboring county. Even more coincidentally, that very day, Wen Jingyan was hosting a full moon banquet for his son, inviting all the local friends and dignitaries. Most coincidentally of all, the Marquis and Marchioness of Ning'an were present, and were even addressed as father and mother. In an instant, a flood of memorials accusing the house of Ning'an of faking death, deceiving a bride, and deceiving the emperor nearly crushed the imperial desk. The Marquis of Ning'an was nearly scared to death. But fortunately, the house steward immediately came up with a plan to save the Marquis. Upon hearing this, he berated Lady Sun for indulging Wen Jingtang's reckless behavior, which threatened to bring ruin upon the entire Wen family. With tears streaming down his face, he submitted a memorial stating that the man was merely a distant relative of Lady Sun who, due to his resemblance to Wen Jingtang, had been mistaken for their son but was not the real Wen Jingtang. He declared he would send the man away immediately. At that moment, someone confronted him, asking why there was no body in Wen Jingzhang's coffin. He replied that when Wen Jingzhang was found downstream, he had been gnawed by fish until his features were unrecognizable. To spare Lady Sun the shock, they had buried him on the spot, and only his ceremonial robes had been brought back to the capital. He also offered to have someone accompany him to Wen Jingzhang's actual burial site to open the coffin. Then he presented a petition requesting a title, stating that he had already petitioned for his only illegitimate son to be named Crown Prince.If Wen Jingtang were still alive, how could he possibly have done such a thing? He wailed with such heartfelt emotion. Yet the emperor found it unbearably tedious. Wen Jingtang had died while overseeing flood control efforts, and the emperor had consequently granted the Marquis's household substantial rewards and compensation. Now he was being told the man had only feigned death. The emperor truly wanted to tear the Marquis of Ning'an to shreds right then and there. Besides, these aristocratic families, who knew nothing but to live off their ancestors' titles, served no purpose other than to obstruct his new policies and cause him nothing but trouble day in and day out. He wished they would all just die, and now the Ning'an Marquis family had concocted this charade of a fake death to save their own skins. So many court officials had seen it and declared it was Wen Jingtang, yet he still dared to argue. Did they think he, the emperor, was weak and easily bullied, afraid to actually execute them? Just as the emperor was on the verge of a rage, the chancellor paid his respects, bringing with him a nearly 10,000-word manifesto on the implementation of new policies. The emperor glanced at it briefly before sitting up straight, then clapped his hands in delight, praising it repeatedly. Upon learning that it had been written by the eldest son of the Wen family, the one awaiting his appointment as crown prince, he was both shocked and puzzled. This lad speaks with substance. He must indeed have grown up among the common people to understand their hardships so well, but why does the chancellor recommend him? This lad may be the key to implementing the new policies. The deadlock between the commoners and the aristocratic clans might just be broken through him. When the imperial edict conferring the title of Crown Prince of Ning'an Marquis upon Wen Jingzhang arrived at his residence, his face turned ashen. I was puzzled. Did he not want to be the Crown Prince of Ning'an? No sooner had the eunuch delivering the imperial edict left than Madame Sun began to scream and curse. You wretch! I knew you'd never settle down. If I'd known this would happen, I never should have taken you back in the first place. Let me tell you, no one is going to take my son's position as crown prince, you little bastard. Before she could finish her sentence, the Marquis of Ning'an slapped her so hard she fell to the ground. You shrew! What nonsense are you spouting? Do you want to get this marquis killed before you're satisfied? If it weren't for Wen Jingyu, his capable son, to inherit the title, the revelation that Wen Jingtang had faked his death to deceive the emperor would have gotten him torn apart by 5 horses, even now. Recalling the scene in the Hall of Diligent Governance where the emperor had glared at him and grilled him, and where he'd nearly been dragged away by the imperial guard, she couldn't help but tremble uncontrollably. His back drenched in sweat, Madame's son hadn't expected the Marquis of Ning'an to lash out so suddenly. Furious, she pointed at him, but just as she was about to speak, the Marquis cut her off in a low, sharp retort. Isn't this situation entirely of your making? Out of the blue, just because of a woman? He abandoned everything. Have you ever considered what his old father would suffer if this were discovered? The Marquis of Ning'an was so enraged that his beard and hair stood on end. He had been thoroughly frightened today, after hearing the emperor praise him for having such a fine son as Wen Jingyu, and then being chided by Wen Tao upon his return. He suddenly came to his senses. Who could argue with that? He is, after all, the Marquis of Ning'an, even if he currently holds only a ceremonial post. It is because of his carefree nature and aversion to strife, but as long as the title of the Marquis of Ning'an remains, he will be held in high esteem. And his descendants will be able to use it to gain an audience with His Majesty and bring honor and prestige to the Wen family. Yet that little bastard Wen Jingtang dares to overturn the Ning'an Marquisate for his own selfish desires. How could he possibly tolerate that? If he doesn't want this Marquisate, there are plenty of others who do. As for you, starting today, you are not allowed to set foot outside the Marquisate, and you are absolutely forbidden from secretly aiding that little bastard. I'll see just how long he can survive without the Marquisate. Madame's son screamed, "You're going to put me under house arrest. Didn't you agree when Jingyan faked his death? You said the emperor would take the reins of power and eventually implement those so-called new policies. Now that the aristocratic families are opposing the emperor, they'll be purged sooner or later. If you don't want to be purged, then..." Nonsense. The Marquis of Ning'an, flustered, slapped her again and shouted harshly, "If you don't want to stay in the Marquis's mansion, then go to the family temple." Madame's son finally couldn't hold back her tears and burst into sobs. When Jingyu followed me back to the courtyard with a grim expression. As soon as we stepped through the door, he wrapped his arms tightly around me and wouldn't let go. "Don't leave me, okay? Huh." His voice carried a strange sense of fear and trembling. I tried to push him away, but the more I pushed, the tighter he held me. It took me a long time to coax the truth out of him. He acted this way because he knew Wen Jingtang wasn't dead and feared I would leave him. I couldn't help but laugh. Guess how my brother and sister-in-law found out where Wen Jingtang was hiding? Wen Jingyu paused, looking at me with a hint of shock. I nodded. "That's right. I knew from the very beginning." "Then what about the joint inheritance of the 2 branches?" asked. Sounding anxious, I leaned against him and placed my hand over his lips. "I chose Uncle Wen. Doesn't he want this?" He immediately pulled me tightly into his embrace, his voice hushed and earnest. "Of course he's more than willing." I laughed softly, wrapping my arms around his neck, and whispered in his ear, "Do you think our child would be willing?" Wen Jingyu froze, glancing from me to my belly, then burst into ecstasy. "I'm going to be a father." He seemed at a loss, but finally dropped to one knee before me, resting his head against my belly and listening quietly. After a while, I saw a glint of tears in the corner of his eye, and my heart softened as I gently stroked his cheek. His mother had passed away early, and he'd been wandering the streets since childhood. It was only natural that he'd longed for a family of his own. "Mingxi, you have no idea what I'd be willing to do just to be with you." It was only much later that I learned our fates had been intertwined since I was 7 years old. Back then, he was just a street urchin. My mother and I rescued him from the snow, and later established an orphanage specifically to care for homeless children. Because of that, he survived, had food to eat, clothes to wear, and even the chance to go to school. For this, he was deeply grateful to my mother and me. By the time he rescued me from the bandits, he had already learned that he was the illegitimate son the Marquis of Ning'an had fathered in his youth. He had originally intended not to claim his lineage, but in order to secure a status worthy of me, He used the name of the Marquis of Ningin's household. Little did he expect that Wen Jingtang would steal credit for his act of heroism. He deeply regretted his decision, yet dared only to watch from the shadows. That is why, the very day I agreed to inherit the titles of both households, he immediately had the news spread, fearing I might change my mind. He is, after all, the sort who accomplishes great deeds without fanfare. Since the Marquis of Ningin ordered Wen Jingtang's expulsion, Madame Sun could not stop it. In the end, only Wen Jingtang's child remained, after the servants brought the child back. I don't know what Lady Sun said to the Marquis of Ningin, but the two of them came to find me with the child. Lady Sun had been confined for several days and looked noticeably haggard. Yet she remained defiant in my presence. Lady Mu, we found this child to be Jingzheng's heir. You shall adopt him into your household and raise him as your legitimate son. I looked at Wen Yanli, who seemed even more frail and gaunt than in my previous Lifio. Wait. In this life I haven't named him yet. Nor do I intend to have any connection with him. So I couldn't care less what he's called. Mother, please don't joke, I'm already pregnant, I said, placing a hand on my belly. The heir to Jingtang should be the child in my womb. Where did you find this bastard? Mother, how could he possibly bear the weight of such a responsibility? You're pregnant, Lady Sun exclaimed in shock. I smiled faintly. Yes. Mother, come to think of it, I should thank you and father for forcing me to serve as the heiress for both households. That's how I was able to conceive a child of my own. As for this bastard, whichever place you brought him from, please send him back there. Let his mother and son be reunited. You. How could you get pregnant so quickly? Jingtang is not even dead yet, and you've already taken up with another man. You slut. Madame Sun shrieked at me in accusation. I lazily brushed her hand aside. What kind of nonsense are you spouting? Mother, wasn't it you who forced me to serve both households? Besides, isn't Wen Jingtang still alive? If he's not dead, why are you still pressuring me to bear him an heir? What exactly are you trying to achieve? Lady Sun recoiled in shock at my icy expression, but I turned my cold gaze toward the Marquis of Ningin. Father, do you really think these are words to be spoken lightly? Why don't I have my elder brother submit a memorial to the emperor, faking one's death to escape responsibility, forcing a wife to serve two households, and now bringing back a child from a concubine to inherit the marquisate? What on earth is the Marquis of Ningin's household trying to do? My voice was not loud, yet it carried the icy shards of 2 lifetimes. The Marquis of Ningin shuddered at the chill in my words, instantly recalling the near-fatal incident in the Hall of Diligent Governance. Come to think of it, if even I could guess that this child was Wen Jingtang's illegitimate son, how could others not know? Once the identity of this illegitimate child is exposed, and the Mu family files another petition against the Marquis's household, it was too terrifying to contemplate. Right now, when Jingtang had to die, he had to die, no matter what. Ha! Lady Mu, you've misunderstood. How could this child possibly be Jingtang's illegitimate son? He's long since been laid to rest. You know, he. Hearing this, Madame Sun grew frantic. But before she could react, the Marquis of Ningin gave a single glance and the steward had several maids cover her mouth. While the child was snatched away, I glanced over but paid it no mind. My father-in-law, the Marquis, is the most heartless and unfeeling man in all matters. As long as they don't affect his interests, he's more than willing to spend others' money. But the moment it involves him, whether it's his wife or his children, he'll cast them all aside. Seeing that I showed no reaction, he put on a sheepish face and tried to justify himself. Your mother merely took pity on this child, who has neither father nor mother, and thought to make him an heir for Jingtang, since you are already carrying Jingyu's child. They are brothers, and this child would carry on the lineages of both branches. Ought to be the legitimate heir. I couldn't be bothered to argue with him, so I replied indifferently. Father speaks the truth. Then I dismissed him. In the end, the child remained in the mansion. Though he was not entered into the family registry, he was confined to a secluded courtyard with the Sun family, left to fend for himself. Wen Jingyu, just as in his previous life, passed the imperial examinations and entered the civil service. However, due to his status as the heir apparent of the Marquis of Ningin, The emperor intended to assign him to the prosperous region of Jiangnan. Jiangnan was indeed wealthy, but because it was home to a complex web of powerful aristocratic families, it was even more difficult to implement new policies there. Wen Jingyu didn't want to go. After all, I was about to give birth, and he had no desire to leave me and the child that I asked him. Don't you want to realize your ideals and aspirations anymore? In his previous life, he had done much to benefit the country and its people in Egypt. I believed that if he were in a different place, he would surely do well there too. I didn't want him to be overlooked because of me. The person who should go to Jiangnan isn't me at a lit Su Pu. I was taken aback. In his previous life, it seemed that Su Pu was the one who had implemented the new policies in Jiangnan. He comes from a merchant family and understands better than anyone the mindset of aristocratic clans competing with the common people for profit. Having him deal with those old foxes is the most appropriate choice. As for me, I am the crown prince of Ning'an. Isn't it more fitting for me to grapple with those old foxes in the capital, men who are my equals or even my inferiors? Unfortunately, the chancellor and his majesty have made up their minds. Wen Jingyu explained it all to me in detail, speaking as if he were about to burst into tears. Utterly aggrieved, but imperial orders could not be defied, with his inauguration drawing ever closer. He had no choice but to begin packing his bags. Yet man proposes, but God disposes. I end this life free from the constraints of the Sun family and with my deliberate indulgence. The Marquis of Ning'an spent nearly every day in the company of women. Thus, though he was originally destined to lose his mind only 3 years later, he died in the arms of a courtesan half a month before Wen Jingyu left the capital. Wen Jingyu was forced to observe 3 years of mourning. In the previous life, when the Marquis of Ning'an died, Ijo was in the throes of turmoil. Local landlords and aristocratic clans had colluded to spark several uprisings, and as a county magistrate, he simply could not extricate himself from the situation. Consequently, he postponed his mourning period, which later became a frequent target of criticism from court officials, though he seemed unconcerned by it. But now, the Marquis of Ning'an's death could not have come at a more opportune time. Wen Jingyu said that as long as he remained in the capital for 3 years, he could shift the balance of power there. Looking at his radiant eyes and brows, I can't help but feel that his achievements in this life will be even more dazzling than in his previous one. What surprised me, however, was that upon learning of the Marquis of Ning'an's death, Lady Sun fainted just as she had in her previous life. When she awoke, she was a paralytic with a lopsided face and unable to speak. Still, she managed to survive. I cared for her for 11 years in that previous life. Yet in the end, I never received a single kind word from her. Before she died in that previous life, she was able to speak in broken sentences, clinging to her last breath. She clutched my hand tightly. You brought my son to his death. You harbinger of doom. After I die, you must take good care of Yanli. Do you understand? He is the hope of the Wen family. You must not. She didn't finish what she was going to say, and I imagine it wasn't anything nice. I end this life. Whether she lives or dies is none of my concern. She has her own loyal servants and her own grandson to look after her. It certainly won't fall on me, her scheming daughter-in-law, now. As for Wen Jingtang and the others, fearing that Wen Jingtang's survival might affect him, the Marquis of Ning'an banished Wen Jingtang's entire family to the north that very night, just the day after they'd finally found a place to settle. Xin took advantage of Wen Jingtang's absence and paid a matchmaker to sell those 2 little harlots who'd seduced him at a bargain price. I bought them back, gave them silver, and set them free. However, when Wen Jingtang returned home and discovered that his concubines had been sold by Xin, the two inevitably engaged in a fierce, sword-and-sword-like argument. Wen Jingtang cursed Xin as a venomous woman, saying that if it weren't for her, he would never have given up his position as crown prince, abandoned his wife to play at some pastoral idyll with her, and ended up with nothing to show for it. Xin called him a useless, spineless man, saying he was good for nothing except relying on his family. Originally, Xin would never have argued with Wen Jingtang, but now that he had lost his position as crown prince and no longer had the support of the Marquis' household, and with her son already living in the Marquis' residence, she no longer had any reservations. Xin had believed that by hooking Wen Jingtang, she would enjoy endless wealth and glory for the rest of her life. and her child would become the new master of the Marquis's estate. Little did she expect that one day, Wen Jingtang would fall from the clouds into the mud, and she saw through that man's true colors completely. Wen Jingtang never imagined things would suddenly turn out this way, according to his plan. Once the new policies were implemented and the court stabilized in a few years, he would use an injury and amnesia as an excuse to cover up the fact that he had faked his death and escaped, then return to his role as the crown prince of Ning'an Marquis, enjoying his wealth and glory. But how did things end up like this? His father had banished him. His mother had abandoned him, and he couldn't even protect the woman he loved most. All his past wealth and glory had vanished like a fleeting illusion. One day, upon waking from his delusion, he burst into maniacal laughter before breaking down in wailing sobs, screaming, "It's all wrong. All wrong. I am the Marquis of Ning'an. I am the Marquis of Ning'an." In the end, he threw himself against a low wall and died. It is said that even as he died, he muttered, "If I die, I can start over. If I die, I can start over." Later, Xinyu traveled across mountains and rivers to return to the capital. She had intended to use her son's name to regain her place in the Marquis's mansion, only to discover that it had been elevated to a duke's estate. As for her son, he had strangled his own grandmother with his own hands many years ago and had been demoted to commoner status. At present, no one knew where he had wandered off to. After that, the streets and alleys of the capital were frequented by a woman with a deranged expression. Whenever she saw anyone, she would claim that her son was a favorite of the emperor and that she was the Marquis's wife. When asked which Marquis's wife she was, she would smile and say, "The Marquis of Ning'an." Everyone would then join her in a fit of laughter. Ever since the Marquis of Ning'an had quelled the turmoil in Liangzhou, the emperor had elevated him to the title of Duke of Ning. So where in the world was there still a Marquis of Ning'an? The story ends here. Thank you for listening.